Joining us now, Joe diGenova, legal analyst, former U.S. Attorney to the District of Columbia. Joe, good morning.
Hey, Joe.
Good morning. Good morning.
So did you get any sleep yet this weekend?
No, not very much.
I didn't think so. So much to talk about. My first question to you is something that I've been wrote down as soon as I heard about all of this, and I knew you were coming on. Question I've not heard anyone else address. What happened to Jerome Corsi in all of this? He was never charged.
Well, Jerome Corsi did something very interesting for a bit player in this scenario. He claimed he was going to be indicted. He said he had been threatened with an indictment for lying to them if he didn't change his story, and he claims that Weissman and company demanded that he say X, and he refused. And then he went on the air and said, they told me they're going to indict me because I won't tell them X. Nothing happened to him. There aren't going to be any more indictments. Apparently, he was telling the truth. And what it shows conclusively is that Andrew Weissman, who was Robert Mueller's bulldog, his lead investigator, his lead lawyer, is a legal thug. And the reason Andrew Weissman is not going back to the Justice Department but is going to teach at NYU and is going to spend a good deal of his time on something called the Innocence Project, if you can believe that. The reason he's not going back is that if he had, he would have been the subject of an ethics investigation by the Inspector General.
Interesting.
So is there, if we find out more about Weissman, about his tactics, we heard about Manafort being put in solitary confinement, we heard about what Jerome Corsi had to say. If that is looked into, and I hope the Republicans do look into this, is there any recourse for him to be punished in any way, shape, or form for what he did?
Well, Weissman has gotten away with this conduct for many, many years, including his conduct in the Enron case, a bunch of cases in the Eastern District of New York. He is skated because of the cowardice of the federal judiciary, which, for the most part, refuses to punish federal prosecutors for violating departmental ethical guidelines and rules of court involving disclosures of exculpatory information. This is a long and horrible story which has been outlined beautifully in Sidney Powell's book, License to Lie. Weissman is perhaps the poster child for what's wrong with federal prosecutors around the country. I'm happy to say that Weissman is not he doesn't exemplify federal prosecutors, but there are too many of them around like him. Barr knows he has a problem, and I expect the Attorney General to deal with this through a series of speeches and guidelines and memos on prosecutorial conduct.
Well, speaking of that, Joe, I mean, Mary and I have a running theme of essentially we all demand full disclosure, especially in details such as we're talking about with Weissman. And it's interesting you brought up the Enron thing. I studied that a while back and recognized that obviously if you do something like that on Enron, you're going to do something like that on this. I would summarize it as essentially what I would call some Soviet-level wrongdoing. So to your point, how do we ensure that we get the maximum information out regarding Weissman and his bag of dirty tricks? Because obviously this is information that they're not going to want out.
Well, that's going to be Lindsey Graham's responsibility. Yeah. There'll be some of this will come out from the Inspector General of the Department of Justice in his look at the FISA and other things. But when all is said and done, there has to be a federal grand jury to investigate not only the FISA abuses, but the unmaskings that occurred at the Obama National Security Council with the authority of Susan Rice, Ben Rhodes, and John Brennan.
Right.
The mastermind of this conspiracy against the President of the United States, which created this false narrative that there was collusion with the Russians, for which Bob Mueller says there is no evidence. I underscore no evidence. What does that mean? It means that the FISA warrants were obtained illegally, that they were obtained with false information. It means that there was, in fact, a conspiracy to deny the President of the United States, Donald Trump, both as a candidate and as a sitting president, of his civil rights, and a number of other people like Carter Page and everybody else. Now, it's very difficult to sue people civilly for this, although I do believe that they have very, very good civil actions, a number of people, including Carter Page, against Comey and Page and Strzok and Brennan and Clapper and Sally Yates and a whole bunch of other people in the Justice Department. But what is required is a federal grand jury. Barr has to impanel a federal grand jury. I don't care what Michael Horowitz finds about the FISA documents. He doesn't have subpoena power. He can't lock anybody up. He can't bring an indictment. I don't care what Michael Horowitz says. His idiotic conclusion before that there was no bias in the investigation of Hillary Clinton or of the president is nonsensical. He laid out all these facts which showed how biased Page and Strzok and everybody else were, and then he says, but they all said they weren't influenced by their political opinions. I don't give a damn what they say about their political opinions. I care about objective evidence. The objective evidence thus far shows that Hillary Clinton had bias used in her favor and Donald Trump had bias used against him. There are two standards of justice in this country now. That's a little bit of that stopped yesterday with the Barr letter to the House and the Senate. If you're a Democrat, you get off. By the way, has Gregory Craig been charged yet, or Tony Podesta, or anybody who did illegal FARA lobbying? No, only Republicans have been charged. No right-thinking Democrat can be happy with that. You cannot have that in a country like this. And Barr has to fix that with a federal grand jury.
Well, I hope that that's the direction I go. And I have one last follow-up question relating to the origins of the whole thing. This is where your world and my world kind of overlap, Joe, is EO 12333, the executive order which prohibits the use of the intelligence community against U.S. citizens, and specifically 2.9, undisclosed participation of U.S. intelligence officers and organizations. Clearly, there were dangles used to try to prompt the Trump campaign folks of having some level of contact with Russia. They avoided that. Clearly, the comment is exonerated. But somewhere, the only place, Joe, that someone could waive the requirements of allowing the FBI to do what they did starts at the White House. So what's your view of what we need to do to determine what the Obama White House role was in
let's be clear about this.
Yeah.
Let's go back to January 20th, 2017, Inauguration Day.
Yeah.
Susan Rice sends herself an email memorializing a January 5th, 2017 meeting in the Oval Office with President Obama, Vice President Biden, Clapper, Brennan, Comey, Sally Yates, and others. That memo says the president wanted everybody to confirm that everything had been done by the book. Now, why would you write that email on Inauguration Day? A, you're stupid. B, you think that all hell is going to break loose because the president has been sworn in. He hasn't been prevented from taking the oath by lawsuits trying to screw up the Electoral College. And now you've got to figure out. Susan Rice, the great liar of the administration, sends this memo. If she had never written that email, we wouldn't know about the January 5th meeting with Obama. But Obama is the tip of the spear.
There you go.
He started this whole thing. He approved it. You do not do what John Brennan did, which was conspire to deprive a presidential candidate of the other party of his civil rights by going overseas personally. Personally, Brennan went overseas to talk to people at MI6 and elsewhere to get them to generate false information, to also do illegal wiretapping by the UK. That the circus did illegal wiretapping of Americans overseas, which is why the head of MI6 resigned shortly after the inauguration. When all is said and done, Obama is at the center of this. I believe that Lindsey Graham has the cojones to do that, but that's what federal grand juries are for.
Right.
And that's what Barr has to do. This started from the top, and Susan Rice is responsible, theoretically, because of her position, for all the unmaskings that went on and then the leaks that occurred.
Joe, we just hang on. We got to get everybody to work. We've got more with Joe diGenova coming up. We're here with Joe diGenova, legal analyst, former U.S. Attorney to the District of Columbia. Joe, so many questions for you. Let me ask you about Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein, we know, was apparently playing both sides of the fence and saying that, hey, 25th Amendment, I'll wear a wire for you, although he denies that. He stayed on, and he was instrumental in putting this letter together with William Barr. Why is Rod Rosenstein still around, and why is he so involved?
Because Barr wanted to use him, and he did so effectively yesterday. Rod wanted to leave 2 weeks ago. He wanted to get out of there ahead of the posse, and Bill Barr said, hey, Rod, you know what? You're not going anywhere. You want a good recommendation for a job in the future? You're staying here until Mueller's done, and then you're going to work with me, and you're going to be responsible for putting out this letter, and you're going to be in this letter, and you're going to take some heat, because you know what, Rod? This is all your fault. So let's look at what Mueller concludes. No evidence of collusion. If that's the case, what evidence did Rod Rosenstein have when he appointed Bob Mueller? The answer, the firing of James Comey. Who recommended the firing of James Comey? Rod Rosenstein. Listen, when the history of this is written, there will be one person who will come away from history with the most sullied reputation of anyone. Rod Rosenstein, a duplicitous, conniving, sniveling, subversive SOB who never should have been Deputy Attorney General, but we had a moron for Attorney General in Jeff Sessions, and he picked him because everybody said, you should have this guy. So now we have a real Attorney General. His name is Bill Barr. And he told Rod Rosenstein, if you ever want to have lunch in this town again, you're not leaving this building until I'm done.
Democrats want to subpoena Barr. They want him in front of them in under oath.
Oh, how stupid they are.
Okay, I was going to ask. Go ahead.
He will testify. They won't have to subpoena him.
Yeah.
And what he will do to them in those hearings will make you laugh and cry and applause. I want Jerry Nadler, the little fat man from the Bronx, to start asking him questions.
But Jerry's good at buffets, Joe. Give him that at least.
Yes, apparently when he had his bariatric surgery, they took part of his brain.
Well, okay, let's talk about the Southern District of New York. That is what the left now is pivoting to.
Right.
It was never about Russian collusion. They've been conditioned for this letdown. They knew it was coming, which is why I don't think you saw the wailing and gnashing of teeth and nobody lit themselves on fire in the streets. They're all saying Southern District of New York. That's where it's going now. SDNY. Is that not, as Tony likes to say, fruit of the poison tree?
Well, whether it is or not doesn't matter. Once again, we come back to basics. Bill Barr is now the Attorney General, not Jeff Sessions. Bill Barr is going to talk to the Southern District of New York in his office on Pennsylvania Avenue. People will come and visit him from the Southern District, and they will be told that they will do nothing without his permission. And if they buck him, they will be stripped of their authority. But Bill Barr is not going to allow the Southern District of New York to become the sovereign District of New York, as they like to call themselves. They are now under the control of a real Attorney General. You will not see any more news conferences like the ones they held after Michael Cohen pleaded guilty, where they essentially accused the president of a crime, which he did not commit. That will never happen again. And if it does, the people who do it in New York will be fired.
So are you saying that the Southern District of New York are not going to pursue investigating Trump's taxes and something, he didn't report 5 cents he made when he was a paper boy back when he was 8 years old?
Well, I think they're probably going to be permitted to continue their investigations, but they're going to do so under the direction of the Attorney General of the United States, who's going to ask them a very typical type of – here's the type of management question you would ask if you're Attorney General. What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's a real simple, what are you doing and what's your goal?
Well,
Do you want to have a sealed indictment? Don't you dare bring a sealed indictment without letting me know, because if you do, I will dismiss it and you will all be fired.
What?
They think they have their own game to play up there. They do not anymore.
Well, to that point, Joe, I mean, I thought the Cohen hearings that, Michael Cohen made amazing posits of information, which showed that the Southern District of New York basically, in my judgment, forced him to change his story materially for purposes of trying to create a political outcome. And to me, it was atrocious that you would have someone who essentially said what he did under oath, supposedly, and contradicted himself. And that was the Southern District of New York's work, right?
Yeah, but they created a false crime for him to plead guilty to, precisely so they could smear the president. You've been told, by the way, by Adam Schiff that they're cooperating with the Southern District of New York in their, quote, ongoing investigation. That is over. That will not be happening as long as Bill Barr. They will work everything they want. They will ask through the Attorney General. They will not be going directly to the Southern District. There's a reason for that. It is against departmental regulations for an individual U.S. Attorney's Office to communicate with any congressional committee. That must be done through the Office of the Attorney General. So all of this so-called cooperation between Schiff and Nadler and Cummings and the Southern District is over. Whatever they get, they will get through the Attorney General, and that will be nothing.
Very quickly, in 30 seconds, where does this leave Roger Stone?
I expect Roger Stone to be his case will not be interfered with for the moment. I do think that the president, like any normal human being, is furious at what happened to all of these people. And whatever you think of Paul Manafort, he has been treated awfully by Mueller and his people. I think all of these people need pardons. I haven't discussed that with the president, but I'll tell you something. When this is over, I don't expect any of these people. Michael Flynn, to me, is the poster child
Right.
for the
yeah.
outrageous
No
conduct
doubt.
of Mueller and Weissman, and may they all rot in hell.
Well, Joe diGenova, thank
And I
you.
don't mean the defendants. I mean the prosecutors
Yes, Joe.
rotting in hell.
Thanks, Joe.
Yes. Thank you, Joe. We appreciate it. Have
Okay,
a
guys.
great